Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to go over part 2 of how to choose a bushcraft survival knife. You'll have to bear with me, I'm going to refer to my notes. This one, I try to keep it from getting very long-winded, so we'll try to run through this as quick as we can. Before we get too far into this, I've got a couple of things here I want to read. One is a clip out of Horace Kephart's book, um, The Book of Camping and Woodcraft. And it is referring to a fixed blade knife. It says a camper has use for a common sense sheath knife, sometimes for dressing big game, but more often for such homely work as cutting sticks, slicing bacon, and frying spuds. Nothing is gained by a longer blade, and would be in one's way every time he sat down. Such a knife, bearing the marks of hard use, lies before me. Its blade and handle are both 4.5 inches long, the blade being 1 inch wide and an eighth inch thick on the back, broad pointed and continued through the handle, has a hasp and riveted to it. It is tempered hard enough to cut green hardwood sticks, but soft enough so that when it strikes a knot or a bone, it will, if anything, turn rather than nick when a whetstone puts it in order. He goes on in detail in the book to describe the handle, the guard, and the sheath. Um, an example of that is the Becker, I want to say it's a BK62. Ethan Becker actually has one of Kephart's original knives and used it as the guideline for the BK62. Another one that is very close, I've actually got two that are very close, are the PR4 and the LT Wright Bushcraft. Now, I've also got a thing from an article written about Nesmith, and it says he favors a trinity system of cutting tools, including a little double bit hatchet of his own design, a light fixed blade, and a more substantial moose pattern folder. Uh, Nesmith's views toward a knife are archetypical of the classic outdoorsman, prefers thin knives, keen edges, and a usable length. It says that he wrote in disfavor of large, thick Bowie knives. Instead, smaller knives designed for cutting efficiency were highly favored. So, two of the biggest names in bushcraft here in the U.S. prefer smaller knives, thinner knives for general tasks. That is what you're seeing more and more people go toward are the smaller, thinner knives. 4.5, 5 inch blades, somewhere in that area. But that being said, it still comes down to personal preference. What we're going to do is we're going to go over a few different blade designs, the three most common ones. I've got examples of all of them, and we'll talk about each of those. We'll talk about the thickness, the benefits, the disadvantages. We'll talk about length a little bit, and the pluses and minuses of those. First thing we're going to talk about is a clip point. I have one here that is a very over exaggerated clip point, and that is the Prather War Buoy. summarized description of a clip point is the forward half of the upper part of the blade looks to be clipped off. There is an example of a clip point. There is another example of a clip point. The thing with most clip points is you have a very precise tip, and the blade has a tendency to taper and get thinner as you go toward the tip. That gives you very, very good penetration, but I have found that that's about where the benefits stop for me, is the penetration of it. After using clip points, drop points, and spear points, past that, they all perform about the same. The difference comes in on the length and thickness of the blade. An example of a drop point. Use this one. There's an example of a drop point. As the spine comes forward, it starts dropping away from that vertical line and dropping down. What that does is allows the blade to carry the thickness in the spine all the way closer, way out closer to the tip. Not all the way to the tip, but way out closer to the tip. That thicker spine, one, makes the knife stronger, makes the tip stronger. Here's another example. If you notice on this one, it just barely starts dropping about right there, and it carries the thickness all the way out to about right there before it starts tapering. An example of a spear point you just saw, that's the PR4 and the LT Wright Bushcraft. And on it, if you look, it carries the thickness of the blade all the way out to about right there, which makes a really, really strong tip. It makes a very stout knife. But the thing that you'll notice with spear points is that point is almost always in line with the center of the handle. There are a few examples that it's not, but more often than not, you'll see that that tip lines up almost with the center line of the handle. Here's another example. And if you look at it, same thing. The tip lines up with the center line of the handle. Each of the three designs has its advantages and disadvantages. The drop point, you have a little more strength because it carries the thickness almost all the way to the point. The point doesn't always line up with the center line of the handle. So if you try to take the tip and make a hole, it's going to be a little off center as you try to do that. The spear point, where the center line's center of the handle, it's very easy to make a hole for like a bow drill divot or something like that. But ultimately, it still comes down to personal preference on blade style. Whatever you like using, whatever you're comfortable with. Now, that being said, we'll talk a little bit about length, and this is the part that gets tricky. Now, we'll use this one as one example. Now, if you're going to carve, say, notches, trap triggers, stuff like that, this will work very, very well for that. Now, that's not saying that you can't carve notches and stuff with this. You can, but due to the size, you're going to have a whole lot more hand and wrist fatigue with this knife than you would with the PR4. Now, break out this one. Can you take this one and carve notches and stuff with it? Yes, you can. But due to the size, it's going to be very unwieldy and very straining on your wrist and so forth to do that. So, what you have to do when picking a knife is to take into consideration what you're going to do with it. I can take this knife and baton with it. I can also take this knife and baton with it. The difference is how big a piece of wood I'm going to baton. Now, me myself, if it starts getting anything over to where I can't handle it with this or with that, which is not a whole lot longer, but a little. If it gets much longer than that, I feel that you need to be using a hatchet or an axe to split it down instead of a pocket knife. That's my opinion. To me, I use a fixed blade knife to baton kindling. Once I get anything bigger than kindling, I revert back to an axe. So, what you're going to use the knife for really comes into play into the length of the blade. Yes, all three of those examples I showed you, you can do the same task with all three of them. But if you're going to concentrate on doing carvings, triggers, notches, food prep, something like that, then a knife more along the size of one of these three or even smaller is going to serve a whole lot better purpose than something that size. So take that into consideration. If you're thinking, oh, I'm going to get one knife and do it all, good luck with that. Not saying that trying to be mean or sarcastic or anything like that, but you're not going to find one knife that will do everything well. It will excel at some things and, for lack of a better way of putting it, suck at others. To my knowledge, I haven't had any luck or know of anyone who's had any luck in finding a knife that is the perfect one tool option. With that being said, I kind of have to go along with Nesmuth's idea of Trinity system. I like to carry a smaller fixed blade, a pocket knife, usually my Ranger 78 Swiss Army knife, and then carry a small hatchet or a tomahawk. And then use those three, and I can cover everything with those three tools. Thickness really comes into play as well. And where that comes into play is when it comes to slicing. The PR4, it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. The SE Laser Strike is 3/16 of an inch thick. You can see a lot of difference there. Then the SE5 is a full 1/4 inch thick. You can see a lot of difference in those. All of these knives will slice. You can do food prep and everything with these. But that being said, the thinner blade of the PR4 excels at food prep and slicing and dicing food over the SE5, just due to the blade thickness. Same thing with cutting meat. I have processed game with this. I've dressed deer with this. And I've done it. Now it's hard to take it and cut really thin slices of meat with it or really thin slices of anything with it for food prep because of the thickness. The blade wants to walk out. Where this, I've done everything with it that I've done with this one, and I don't have the problem with the blade wanting to walk out. Now, this one, I have batoned wood, the size of a water bottle with it. This thing, I've batoned wood that big with it. Wouldn't attempt to baton something that big with the PR4, just because to me there's not enough blade there. Again, it still comes down to personal preference, but these are things to consider when looking into buying and purchasing a knife. I've got a few more things I'm going to cover in this series, probably at least 2, maybe 3, depends on if I decide to combine a couple of them. But that's all we're going to cover today. I know this is a lot of information thrown at you fast, but it's food for thought. Think about what you're doing with your knife. Think about what you're going to use it for, and then start considering, okay, do I need a smaller, thinner knife? Do I need a longer, thicker knife? And go from there. Well, that's all I've got for you today. Like, share, subscribe, leave me a comment, and I'll get another one made for you here soon.